Welcome back. A concert by an American Christian singer took place in Nova Scotia last night, a long way from the original venue. Sean Foyke had been scheduled to do a show at York Redoubt National Historic Site near Halifax, but Parks Canada pulled the permit following complaints. The show was moved to Shubenacadie last night, where hundreds of people attended. Foyke has spoken out about gender ideology, abortion, and the 2S LGBTQ plus community. A supporter of the MAGA movement, none of his views sit particularly well with protesters. In response, Parks Canada's decision, the singer posted a video on Facebook saying that he was a victim of intolerance. Shows were also booked in Moncton and Charlottetown. Officials canceled those as well. The PEI performance has moved to a different location. In all cases, the venue operators cited safety concerns. Joining us to talk about this, Wayne MacKay, Professor Emeritus at Dalhousie Law School and an expert in constitutional law and the Charter. Thank you for being here. Nice to see you.
Always a pleasure.
Is this an issue of the right to free speech?
It is an issue that raises the question of free speech, and no question about that. And the general starting rule on free speech, especially in the U.S., but Canada too, is you shouldn't discriminate based on content. So that's probably the starting point, which the speaker mentioned there. But like all rights in the Charter, they're subject to reasonable limits.
He hasn't broken any laws that we're aware of in Canada.
That's what I understand.
Okay, so it's mostly a case where people don't agree with his politics. And Parks Canada, which operates York Redoubt, the Garrison Grounds in Halifax, Georges Island, where events take place, revoked the permit, as was done by Charlottetown and Moncton. Does that then put those government bodies in a precarious position the next time someone books that venue and a group decides they don't like who's performing and puts up a stink?
Well, I think it can, if in fact the basis for the distinction is seen and is in relation to content, because the idea is content neutrality, that whether or not you like what people are saying, they should be allowed to say it. That's the free speech position. But it's not necessarily, as you mentioned a few moments ago, if they argue that it's for some other reason, such as security questions or lack of order that would be produced or some other legitimate limit on free speech, not just content. But if you admitted and said directly, this has to do with content, then they are in a problem.
Okay. Safety seemed to be what was cited here at each of these venues.
Exactly, and that's a common one. A long time ago now in Concordia, Netanyahu was barred from attending, and again the issue was raised was one of safety because of the number of protesters and the kinds of concerns that protesters were indicating.
We've seen this at universities a number of times. Speakers brought in, and there is some people who are upset by the politics, one side of the political spectrum or another. That person is uninvited or, given the run off campus. Similarities?
Lots of similarities, and in fact that's kind of the normal pattern, and it played out most recently not just on one-time speakers but student encampments or encampments of a pro-Palestinian variety objected to by people who were saying that was anti-Israeli or anti-Semitic and those kind of things. So it's a fairly typical pattern, and one of the things that's also fairly typical now is, while it used to be the establishment censoring left-wing or protest movements, increasingly now it's the right-wing groups who are in fact being censored in some ways. Both sides, actually, the left and the right, are challenged.
Community standards have any legal standing here?
Not in a direct sense in that particular term, but what does have a standing is what people can expect from especially governments and government agencies in terms of what kind of speech they promote. And that's a really other big point here, that if in fact it was hate speech, and there's no indication of that directly, and hate speech is hard to prove, but if that's the case, clearly they should and did the right thing in canceling. But there's other arguments now, such as promoting equality. So if vulnerable groups like the 2SLBGTQ plus community or women or any number of minorities are being targeted, that it's legitimate to put some limits on the speech, that there's free speech but not freedom to hate and or to stir up hate. So that's another theme that increasingly comes out these days.
And of course, we're seeing this being played out in libraries, in school boards and the like.
Absolutely.
About books, certain books, and where they should be put.
Absolutely, and they're often done under the banner of parents' rights, and it's, again, people acting often heavily influenced by fairly strong right-wing movements, particularly in the U.S., which also play out in Canada, to have certain books promoting, for example, tolerance of gays or tolerance of difference and those kind of things, and they object to those kind of books in a kind of Trump world that should then be banned from the libraries, not on the curriculum and those kind of things. So that's happening with increasing frequency.
Do you think this will simply continue to ramp up, or would you see some sort of scaling back or scaling down of this type of incidents?
I hope it will settle down, but I think we can't ignore the fact that the current president of the United States kind of provides some sanction for this kind of behavior, and until that ends, it may be more stirred up, and that has been the case. But in that regard, Canada has been better than the U.S. in recognizing legitimate limits on free speech, that free speech does not mean anything goes. What it means is you have to abide by the laws, the hate speech laws, the human rights codes, those kind of things, and that it's legitimate to consider on the other side equality and the impact on people that are affected by that kind of speech.
Wayne, it's a supercharged issue. We haven't heard the last of it, I'm sure. We appreciate you coming in to help guide us through some of this.
Well, it's a controversial area, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it again.
No doubt. We appreciate having you available to us. We'll take a break. We'll be back with more of your local news.